Happy Friday, parents. So we just want to update you again on what's been happening with your students at school and what's to come. So I want to talk about our one of our core values that we've been talking about in class as well as on the announcements. So our core value is empathy. And so we've talked to the students about what empathy means, and I drew some hearts here. And it really means, walking in somebody else's footsteps and really understanding how they view the situation or whatever is at hand. So we want to make sure we're speaking this language and we're telling the kids all about empathy because it's really important. Also, parents, because it's the new year, we're running out of school supplies. It happens every year. So here are some suggestions. If you'd like to send any in, that'd be great. Tissues, pencils, and loose leaf paper. We would greatly appreciate it. Thank you, parents. And also here is kind of our schedule for next week. They do have a few tests next week. They just happen to fall that way where they're on the same week. So I just wanted to show you that on Wednesday we have a CCA in reading, and it's on poetry and nonfiction. Then on Thursday we have a math CCA with division, problem solving, and fractions. And on Friday there is the math MAP test, which is that computerized test that gives us a lot of information about what level they're on and where we can really target their skills that they're lacking to make them better in math, reading, any of the subjects, but Friday it will be math. So to start with reading, I want to go over some of the things we've learned in the classroom and how the students can do better when they take the CCA. So I took some notes for the students. So in nonfiction, we talked a lot about bucketing the information so that we can have a main idea. So gathering all those facts together and really coming up with what is the author trying to tell me in this section. The next thing is using strategies. We've done strategies all year long on tests. Some of the strategies include close reading, which means annotating all around. Oh, I put that one next. Annotating all around their reading so that they remember what they're reading. So they're kind of jotting along the side there. Also looking for different things, looking for text features, looking for text structure. How do those things fit in with nonfiction? And the last strategy we learned for nonfiction was the OWL strategy, which is to observe what is in the text feature, wonder why the author put it there, and then link those two together to see what the author is trying to tell you. For poetry, we've talked a lot about poetry being more like fiction. There's a lot of feelings, and you should always be asking why the author did that. Because in poetry, sometimes they'll squish words together, or they'll make the words, have a different shape. So thinking about why the author is doing that. They put everything in there on purpose, so we really have to ask ourselves that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Nolan for math.
Hi, parents. We have been working on fraction concepts. What a fraction is, how to model a fraction, how to understand a fraction. We're using words like numerator and denominator, equal to, greater than, and less than. We've also been adding and subtracting, or we should say composing and decomposing fractions using unit fractions. And a unit fraction is a fraction with 1 in the numerator, so 1 on the top. So like 1/4, 1/8, 1/6. Those are unit fractions. We have also worked on generating equivalent fractions. And the students worked on this in 3 ways. We used models, we used fraction strips. The students also drew models, and then we did this mentally or mathematically as well. So basically you can generate or make an equivalent fraction by modeling it, drawing a fraction strip. We usually compare our fraction strips to a whole. Ms. Holmeyer does this much better than I do. Pointing. Anyway, here's the fraction strip with the whole right here. And then it's broken into a third, and then just by dividing it down the middle or any other way where we're making it into equal units, you can generate an equivalent fraction. And in this case, we made 2/6. Another way to do it is to set up a table, which is super easy to do. State the initial fraction, 1/3, right here. And then skip count the denominator, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. Skip count the top number, the numerator, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you've got equivalent fractions. Also, mathematically, the students learn to generate equivalent fractions by multiplying both the numerator and the denominator by the same number. We've really worked on benchmark fractions too, to compare fractions, and the students should understand fractions that represent 1/2. They should know that the numerator is half of the denominator, so they should be able to rattle those off pretty quickly. They did a pretty good job with that. Because we're generating equivalent fractions, we also worked on simplifying fractions, which is just basically doing the same thing but the inverse operation. And in this case, we're looking for the greatest common factor of two numbers, but any common factor will do. So we worked on factoring this week, and you can see how we are factoring down here. I like the kids to factor sequentially so that they're starting with 1, like 6 is 1 times 6, 2 times 3. If you had a larger number like 24, you just start with 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6, and then we don't include those turnaround facts. That way we don't miss any of our factors. We're looking for a common factor, not 1, because 1, if you divide by 1, it's not going to change anything. And then we divide the fraction by the same on the numerator and denominator, and you've got then you've got your simplified fraction. Next year in 5th grade, all fractional answers will be expected to be in simplified form. On the homework this week, there was 18/23. We talked about 23 being a prime number. That fraction was unable to be simplified, so that was kind of a tricky question for them at this point. We're working on adding and subtracting fractions. Students should know not to add the denominator. They know that the fraction has to have the same denominator in order to add or subtract, and that's why we are working on generating those equivalent fractions so that they can do that with ease. Next week, our math CCA will focus on problem solving, like multi-step problems with all 4 operations. We're going to focus a little bit on division. We're working on division a little bit more, but we're going to be focusing on division and problem solving in tutoring. Also, it will have a lot of fraction work too because we spent so much time with that. As soon as we tie up our fractions next week, we're going to move into geometry. So that should be fun. Geometry is fun. It's a lot of memorization though, a lot of vocabulary, but a lot of hands-on too. The kids usually have a good time with that. We're finishing, or we're still working through force, energy, motion. We're talking about friction, gravity, and magnetism. And next week we'll start our earth sciences, and we'll start with changes to land, including erosion, deposition, and weathering. So,
alrighty. Well, thank you, parents. Y'all have a wonderful afternoon.